Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. We have what promises to be an extremely stimulating discussion meeting today, and it will cover a lot of ground, very relevant ground to current international relations and order. The US pivot to Asia has arguably for the first time introduced a bilateral military competition, or certainly strategic competition between China and the US. At the same time, China's perceived assertiveness in its near seas and rapid development of its navy means that the Asia-Pacific region is definitely living in what the apocryphal Chinese proverb would call interesting times. So to be able to untangle these various aspects of disputes around China's border, the rivalry between China and the US, and the development of China's navy and maritime capabilities, we have with us Professor Lyle Goldstein of the Naval War College and also of Brown University. Professor Goldstein is one of the world's foremost experts on China, but also particularly on China's naval capabilities, and regularly peruses the Chinese language literature to better inform both his publications and therefore the wider public. He is currently working on a book that will focus on Sino-US relations and China's navy, and this will very much be a précis of that book as well as his other ideas. So I will leave it to Professor Goldstein to speak for the next half an hour, then we'll have a Q&A afterwards.
Well, thank you so much for coming, 大家好. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks to Christian, I should say, Christian himself doing superb work in the field of, well, as we understand, China's rise, particularly in the maritime sphere. I want to commend this organization, IISS, for really being a leader in the field, and that's one reason I'm so glad to be here. I've published now 3 articles in Survival, so I feel, in a way, I feel kind of a close kinship here as almost part of the team. But really, as just standing back as an Asia specialist, I can say that the work that IISS is doing in Asia and for East Asian security is truly remarkable and extremely commendable. So we thank you for all of your collective good work. I would like, I should say, our institute, this China Maritime Studies Institute, was founded in 2006. I'm proud to say I was the first director of the institute. I led it for about 5 years. I've recently stepped down to do more of my academic research, but this institute may be of special interest to you because it is really the only institute within the U.S. government doing specialized work solely focused on China. So you may take note of that, and please, I invite you to follow the work of our scholars. Really got about a dozen faculty at the college, who many of whom have good Mandarin and who are doing quite important work, I think, on China. So we will look forward to hopefully many more fruitful scholarly interactions in the cause of global security. I thought I might just pass out a few, maybe I can just pass these around that you can see them. This is the red books, or maybe you call them whole shoe, that show you that we are publishing on quite regularly. These are all available on our website if you simply can find them on Google. So let me jump into this presentation and share with you some of my findings and my kind of vision for where U.S.-China relations, how they might perhaps develop a better complexion than we see today, which I think is, as I'll share with you, I see it as quite troubled. Now, in Washington, the debate is becoming ever more intense. We have our panda huggers, perhaps here represented by Dr. Kissinger. I count myself as an admirer of Dr. Kissinger. Aaron Friedberg, Contest for Supremacy. Perhaps you've seen this book. I'll tell you quite candidly that when I walk around the Pentagon, I often see this under the arms of people walking around the Pentagon. This book has had enormous influence. I'm a great admirer of well, both these authors, but I think if we look at the panda huggers, let's say, and I'm speaking crudely now, and the so-called dragon slayers, I might characterize myself as a dragon hugger. So you see I fall somewhere in between, and I'll let you kind of puzzle about that one for a few minutes, and maybe we can go back to that little joke. But I say quite seriously, and share with you my viewpoint, how I fall in between these different arguments. By the way, I did want to mention that I think perhaps I should fix this slide and put up there Hugh White's very fine book. I think his articulation, the book is The China Choice. I understand he was here in October, but I want to say for those of you who are interested in China and the U.S.-China relationship who have not read this book, this is a must-read. I think this is the finest articulation of the state of this relationship and where it needs to go. And I'm sorry I missed his talk here back in October. But let me pass this around because I feel that this book has very unique significance. You'll see my scrawlings all over it, so please forgive me for that. I tend to scrawl. Let me push on here. So here's the ground I hope to cover today. I'll speak a little bit about history. I think history is so important and we neglect it at our peril. I'll talk some about the South China Sea. As a bit of a case study in this rivalry. I'll talk some about China's military power. That really is the focus of my expertise. And then I will show that we see escalation in this rivalry in almost every dimension of U.S.-China relations. You see the rivalry building, and I'm very troubled by that. And then I want to close up by making some proposals. Give you a glimpse of the work I'm doing in my current book project on U.S.-China relations, where I'm looking to find that space. What I hope to do is really, in a way, take it a step further than Professor White's fine book and really try to show concretely what are those steps that both Washington and Beijing need to take to find that middle space of compromise so that we can build a more stable 21st century. All right, well, if we talk about history, we would do, I was already convinced that history was essential to U.S.-China relations. I became even more convinced when I saw that Xi Jinping, on one of his first days in office, gathered his Politburo and said, let's go to the Party History Museum. If anybody's been to that museum, it's quite an interesting place, just renovated. And I think this is this shows the current Chinese leaders' attentiveness to the historical legacy that confronts U.S.-China relations. Now, this picture is somewhat shocking, but I think it's not too far from reality. When you walk into that museum, the first picture that you will see is an American Marine sitting in the chair of the Chinese emperor, the throne. So, we'll have to consider the historical backdrop for this broader relationship. Here's a bit more evidence in that regard. This is an article, a speech, I think, given by Xi Jinping. You can see he says, the title of it is something to the effect of party cadres need to consider history a little bit. And you can see there from the quote, that this is, a very kind of, let's say, the sense that China has been victimized through its modern history is very much stands out. This is not a long piece, but this kind of stridency is there. Here's another little bit of evidence on that. I might hope as an American that they might blame that whole opium war thing on you guys, but I guess that's not the case. And in fact, this is, I think, pretty much just a statement of the truth. But even we'll look around to the Korean War. I happened to be in China during the 60th anniversary, and boy, let's say the Chinese have not. This is also by Xi Jinping. It was a book related to the commemoration. And his was an introductory piece, also a speech that he gave on the occasion. But as you can see, let's say the Chinese may view this history rather differently than we do. Right, let me now turn to the South China Sea just a little bit. And here you see that map that is making a lot of people very angry around the region. You might also note this picture on the bottom left. I don't think you have to be a naval person to consider that when the bow of one ship is going into the bridge of another ship, that something rather unpleasant is going on. And indeed, the tensions are growing in the region worse and worse. I would commend my colleague's book, which I'm very anxious to read, the new Adelphi paper on that issue. I've also been researching this the South China Sea for quite a while, published a piece recently in Contemporary Southeast Asia, and looked through a lot of Chinese materials here. I think most of these materials have not been seen or have not been looked at by other scholars. But what I want to suggest, for example, look at the date here. This is 2007, so this kind of material quite predates the recent tension. Look, what you see here is a debate here, kind of a pro-con debate. One side arguing China must absolutely control the Malacca Strait, and then a counter-argument saying, no, it's not feasible, actually, nor would it be good for Chinese diplomacy. So what I'm suggesting here is that there is a debate in China, very much so, ongoing, and I think many of these issues are not settled. Now, this is from 2008, and again, I would say we might be shocked just how, let's say, dovish the character of this kind of analysis is. These are people who definitely are very informed on the issues. The State Oceanic Administration is the group that runs the maritime surveillance ships that we are continually seeing in the photos. So I find this quite encouraging. The policy is 共同开发, that is joint development. So that is all very encouraging. But as we move forward, this also from 2008 and rather encouraging. This is in 中国军事科学, their premier military journal. And you see from these quotes, quite an encouraging viewpoint, but things turn much darker as we move forward into 2010 and forward. And this deserves some reflection. Why did we go in this very much darker direction? Here's Admiral Hu Yanlin, and I would submit that this man, probably very close to China's senior leadership, almost the right-hand man of Wu Shengli, their chief of naval operations. Look at that center quote. That's a very dark quote. If this is the viewpoint of China's senior leaders in the military area, then we are in for a very rocky century. This is a very dark kind of viewpoint. Look at that, advocating to build the legal basis for non-peaceful means. Okay, that's not very subtle. Let me say I'm extremely concerned about the situation, and I don't think it has gotten much better since 2010. I think we're still there. This is 2011 in an official Dangda, their official naval journal. The title is quite cautious, but if you read the article, you'll see it's almost girding for a battle. Also very hawkish. This is 2012 now, Huangyandao crisis, which still remains unresolved. In my almost 2 decades of reading through Chinese literature, I have not seen this kind of bellicose rhetoric, and find it extremely troubling. All right, let me move ahead to the next part of my discussion, which covers the military buildup, which I think is quite extensive. In my article in Survival that I wrote in 2010, I think I said, well, China's production of surface combatants is rather moderate. We haven't seen the destroyers. They seem to be moving rather slowly. Well, I'll probably have to take that back now because the production of surface combatants has indeed increased markedly. Now, but I want to say that China's military power is very much multi-dimensional, broad, and also deep. It's hard to find areas where China is not moving forward very rapidly, including, as we might consider China land power, absolutely. I've been watching all through the winter a variety of pretty serious winter warfare exercises, and one might consider that those are sort of directed at the North Korean scenario, such as it is. But this is a multi-dimensional military power that we're seeing develop, and indeed, I observed how when we talk about Chinese air power, the J-20 made all kinds of headlines, and indeed, I think we can say it was a significant a shock to many in the United States that China had moved so quickly to develop a fifth-generation fighter. But little has been said about J-31 and the meaning of the fact that if China has now 2 fifth-generation fighter programs, again, it suggests just how broad the military program is. Now, yet another fighter to consider, of course, this is the carrier. I won't say too much about the carrier. I had been, I would say, in the past, somewhat dismissive of this program, and I still don't regard it as kind of the center of China's, developing fleet. And yet, I would also say that China would not develop this capability if they weren't intent on defending it and employing it. So I do think that we have to watch this carefully, and there is some, we can consider some scenarios where the aircraft carrier will be useful, but there are so many areas of naval power that are not, often discussed and yet could have a huge impact in any of these conflicts. Here's an example. We've heard a lot about the so-called anti-ship ballistic missile capability, and yet here's something considerably more mundane, and yet this DH-10 cruise missile launched from kind of, I guess what we would call modern-day coastal artillery, and yet can reach out almost 1,000 miles. Boy, if I'm, considering this from the Japanese perspective, for example, this can be a very, very potent weapon, but one that is not really discussed, but maybe even a game changer. This ship making headlines recently, a Type 056 Corvette, definitely filling in some holes, in Chinese naval capability, probably on the ASW front, but also in the kind of creating presence. And indeed, when the production rate of these vessels is impressive. These didn't exist 2 years ago, and yet I think I've heard recently that maybe almost 24 already in build and so forth. So that suggests the nature that when China wants to put its foot on the accelerator as far as military development, it can do so, and that is in line with our expectations. It's the submarine side, though, that has many of us most concerned. Here, China has made quite remarkable strides, particularly on the conventional submarine front, and we're giving these quite a lot of respect. This platform likely has air-independent propulsion, and it means that it's quite advanced and quiet. Now, here's some material recently looked at. Those of you from United Kingdom will note that the Chinese are very interested in what was going on in the North Sea and in that traditional ASW line that was such an important part of the Cold War at sea. And China probably conceives of their naval strategy quite differently, though. As you can see there, they're not necessarily going to go in for the bastion strategy. They call it, use different terminology even. But as a naval analyst, I'm impressed that they are doing they understand the human element. They understand the soft tissue that makes a naval system work, including, for example, maintenance procedures. It's not to say that they're on par with the Western navies here, and they understand there's a gap. If you read the full interview with this Admiral Zhu, that you would see that he had a lot of big headaches on the maintenance front. But this is part of the process of professionalization. I was just at a mine warfare conference, and I can tell you China continues to be very active in mine warfare. They're one of the few navies that is really pushing the boundaries of offensive mine warfare. So that is quite interesting. As you can see, they also monitor developments, for example, in the U.S. Mine inventory, as you can see from the quote on the upper right. And here's an interview, actually, that was published with a professor from the Naval Submarine Academy. And it's telling just how much this professor from their submarine academy thinks about mine warfare and, indeed, offensive mine warfare. This, to me, shows that this is a key part of their doctrine. But again, there are so many different dimensions that aren't really talked about in the newspapers here of their military development that I think could be important. And one of them, I know Christian's written some on this, as have I, about the, Christian calls them paramilitaries. I published a piece on this in 2010, one of these red books I showed you. And there's been quite an important development here where they have begun to unify these elements so that instead of 5 or even 9 elements, there are now 2 elements. And we can discuss the implications of that, but undoubtedly this is part of China's maritime dynamic kind of maritime policy. And here you see this article, for instance, shows some evidence of the ties between these groups and the Navy, which is not surprising, really. Most Coast Guards work closely with the navies. But this slide, quite a bit more disturbing here. This shows a scheme of a wartime refit of their Coast Guard. And so, this is, I don't want to say this ship, well, the ship does exist, but this layout of the ship with, say, towed arrays or ASW torpedoes, that is, we haven't seen that in existence. This is maybe more in the line of a proposal. But what I'm suggesting here with this slide is this situation could get much more dark than it currently is. Even this arms race could intensify. And the great graphic from The Economist showing the lines converging on combatants there, and you see the Chinese. I don't want to overstate the importance of this. That is, it's kind of crude. It doesn't show a tonnage, for example. But there's something in this graphic too. We don't want to deny that. And I would suggest also that China has some room to increase its defense budget considerably. I think their defense spending is somewhere around maybe 1.8% or so. You know, if they, and there are many Chinese voices now saying that China should increase that to 3, 4, 5%. Again, that presents a very different world than we have now. Now let me move to another part of my talk here where I want to show that the rivalry is spreading. This is just a typical article, quite typical fare from October 2012. It says an American carrier is in the vicinity of the Diaoyu Senkaku dispute. And I want to suggest this is quite typical. And by the way, I remember at that time kind of searching through American news outlets to see if this was also being reported. But I think, to me, it shows a bit of asymmetry there. The fact that, this is very regular fare in the Chinese context, in Chinese media context, and yet you hardly ever see articles about. It's quite rare in most Western news outlets. A little more on Japan here, though. Just to, you can see that the view is very dark. They see the ever-tightening of the U.S.-Japan alliance as being a major threat to China, absolutely. On the Korean side, of course, there's been a lot of news lately, but even just looking back, from the Chonan episode, here's a survey that appeared, a strategic survey. They do something kind of like what IISS, I think, does in that respect. But the suggestion that that this is helping, basically this incident has caused the U.S. to sort of try to pursue a kind of Dongya Beiyue, meaning a NATO in Northeast Asia. So that, I think, shows a kind of Chinese threat perception. Here talk about the Indian Ocean, Kaplan's book Monsoon sort of has created a lot of discussion on this issue. And this, I'm afraid to say, though, that this has also, helped to kind of raise the level of anxiety in Beijing, where 10 years ago, I think India was not really on the kind of much considered, certainly not as a threat in Beijing. I think that's beginning to change now, and that, I think, is disturbing. Look at Iran. I was just giving some lectures on China-Iran relations, and you can see they do follow that very closely. But even if we look at how do they assess the Iran nuclear question, you see even that, and maybe this is somewhat egocentric from the Chinese perspective, but some Chinese commentators evidently see the current Western policies on Iran as part of an overall strategy to contain China. So this, to me, is also quite troubling. It's not to say that many Chinese don't view the nuclear proliferation is problematic. They do, but these voices are out there too. Now, even in areas where U.S.-China relations, I think, should be and do indeed show considerable promise. For example, in the environmental area, where I must say a lot has been achieved. These cooperative research centers have been set up. It's quite impressive if you look at the details. But even there, and in particular on the climate change question, as I've looked at some of what Chinese specialists are saying, even there you see this kind of very anxious outlook, and the sense that even the suggestion by some of their foremost experts that the United States' general approach is to try to limit China's development. So again, I'm quite troubled, especially when these are areas, Taiwan, I would say as well, is an area where you might expect to see some room for agreement, cooperative steps. On Taiwan, a little bit, but there's also a lot of concern here. Many Chinese asking, what does the pivot mean for Taiwan policy? And you can see, not so surprising here that the Chinese military, this is their naval newspaper, is taking a pretty dark look at developments on Taiwan. And thinks that the United States is just grasping for other trump cards. So all this to me is very troubling. Now I do want to say, there are some more positive voices. For example, here this is one of their academic studies on Taiwan. This one is looking for ways to move forward on the military-to-military relationship between Taiwan and the mainland. This is a professor at National Defense University, so I think this is quite an important article. And actually, if you read the details here, and I don't really have time to share them with you on this particular article, it's striking that the Chinese, this particular Chinese professor, be advocating that Beijing consider some concessions here, that it drop its position that there be preconditions here. So I want to say there are some points here where we should consider that some real. I consider the Taiwan issue now as an opportunity missed. That is, there's some good news across the strait there, and the West, the United States in particular, should be thinking, how can we use this as an opportunity to make real progress in U.S.-China relations? That's my outlook. And indeed, this was hardly reported. I guess peace doesn't really sell newspapers. This was actually the first Taiwan mainland joint exercise. A second one took place, even much bigger scale, last summer or so, and I think another one will take place. So, I mean, there is some good news out there, and we need to reflect on that and think about the opportunities. So let me just wrap up here. I like this cartoon very much. I'm not a dog owner, but those of you who are may, my perception is that dogs, they never quite know whether they can, as it were, they make a match, and things can go very bad very quickly with dogs. That's my perception. But they can also go very well. So I really think this is a good analogy for you where we're at right now. So maybe I'll try to make that the cover of my forthcoming book. I don't know. I surely have to consult with the copyright people. Now, here is the kind of cooperation spiral that I'm seeking to build, and I don't want to give you guys a headache because I have about 10 of these, but I'm only going to show you 2. But my idea is that we have to reach some kind of compromise with China. I have no doubt about that. And here I'm just following the logic of Hugh White. I agree with basically 100% with what his argument is. But what are the actual steps? He elaborates a kind of concert of Asia. I agree with that, but we have to talk in concrete terms, policies that could help us get there. And I believe small steps are necessary to get to some bigger solutions. And as you can see, some of these are very controversial, both on the Chinese side, where I'm asking for more transparency. I'm asking for some clarification of that awful U-shaped line, which drives everybody crazy. I'm asking them to operationalize joint development. They have said joint development is their policy. Well, what do we have to show for that? Not much. We need to move forward with joint development. That is the only way we're going to get to a better place. But I'm also asking that Washington act with some restraint and consider some different policies from what we see today. And here, as you guessed, I'm not speaking as a representative of the U.S. government, but as a professor. So this is one set of ideas for how to get to a better place with China on the South China Sea. And here's another on Taiwan. And again, I have one for the Korean Peninsula, and I have one for I even have one on climate change that I'm working on. So I'll be happy to share those if people in the audience want to see them. But on Taiwan, really, no surprise here. I mean, you've got to start with small steps, absolutely. But here, the kind of pullback of missiles and general restraint by China. For example, those of you military experts in the room know that China is making major strides on the amphibious warfare area. I didn't talk a lot about that, but it's evident. There are some real changes underfoot now. But China in the next 10 years could get to a place where we used to talk about a million-man swim, we now are thinking about a real serious amphibious threat to Taiwan that hasn't really existed. But maybe China could pursue restraint as part of a process of accommodation, mutual accommodation. So you can see now you're saying to yourself, well, boy, none of this is ever going to happen. It's so controversial. Absolutely, it's controversial. I think we need to talk about real issues. We have, this was said in the Wang Lieberthal, a wonderful paper on strategic distrust. We have so many dialogues with China, but how often do we actually start to talk about substance and move forward on the issues? That's what I'm advocating for. So I realize this is not going to make me any friends in Beijing or in Washington, That I understand. And in fact, I'm quite reassured. In both places, I need to make people angry. If I don't make enough people angry in both places, then I surely have not done what I've set out to do. So on that note, 29 minutes.
Yeah. You did promise 30, I have to say. That's very good.
Okay.
That's very good. Thank you, Lars. Do you want to retake your seat and we'll take some questions from here?
What were you feeling the first question? I'm just going to get some of my
Sure. I think it was very valuable and comprehensive, overarching analysis of China's naval development and also Sino-US relations. From the Institute's perspective, it's interesting that Lyle also concentrated on those less glamorous but probably much more significant naval developments in the PLAN beyond the aircraft carrier, things like the DH-10, LACM, the Type 56 Corvette, Type 52D destroyer, all of which we tried to highlight in the military balance this year as probably the main focus of analysis for where China's Navy is actually heading towards. And submarines and the Type 71 amphibious assault vessels are key within that as well. Also the idea that the maritime agencies play a key role within China's maritime strategy, perhaps indicative of the kind of comprehensive national power idea that Chinese analysts often like to utilize. We have about half an hour for Q&A, and there are many questions I think that could be asked. I already see a few hands going up. I will try and gather the questions. Let's start with one at a time to begin with. If you could give your name and affiliation beforehand, that would very much help. And let's start in the second room.
Thank you, Chairman. Gordon Wilson, Fellows Royal United Service Institute, and also a member here. I don't know if Christian told you, but last week we had the Chinese ambassador speaking here.
Right.
And I probed him directly on the question of where the carrier would fit into the strategy and also what its actual role and capabilities would be. And he very much downplayed that and the maritime perception. Now, given the ambassador's got to worry about things like politics and trade and that sort of stuff, how well briefed would he be? Would he be briefed up to date on these issues, or actually it'd be quite a difficult subject for him and he really wouldn't know, therefore he'd gloss it over? And as you showed that photograph there, I thought that the Chinese were doing trials of carrier-borne aircraft ashore. They're doing, from what you say, they're doing deck launches, are they? And I didn't think they got to landing stages yet, have they?
Sure, I'll be happy to update you.
And just one other thing finally is that, yes, expansion is extraordinary, but getting the manpower, the proper trained manpower, and it must be much more difficult to get them the sort of capability with these new vessels coming along.
Thanks very much. That's a raft of good questions. I'll take them in pieces. For one, much is made of the civil-military divide in China, and there's something to this for sure. There's been more than one occasion where I've been in Beijing and pitched a question to a civilian academic, or MFA type official, or one of these think tank types in Beijing, and then had a military officer completely contradict that view, and that kind of suggests that there's this kind of yawning gap of kind of expertise. Now in the West, we've kind of, I know in the United States for sure, but I think also here we have a kind of tradition of civilian defense analysis, and we value that generally. I hope, but that doesn't so much exist in China, and that creates some perception gap and also some knowledge gap. We can point to maybe a few examples of what we might call almost a civil-military crisis in China on various issues. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. One was the ASAT test, so-called anti-satellite test in 2007, where China, I think, somewhat inadvertently blew space debris all over the atmosphere, causing a major diplomatic incident. And there we it was very legitimate to ask, was that fully vetted? Did the Ministry of Foreign Affairs understand these things? Did Hu Jintao understand these things? So, I think your question is quite right. Though I do want to. The other example I would give is, I know there was recently another earthquake in China, but the Wenzhou quake in 2008, right before the Olympics, there is some evidence that Wen Jiabao really that he got very angry with the Chinese military leadership at that time because he thought that they were not sufficiently attentive to mobilizing military assets for disaster relief. It'd be interesting to watch the current episode in that respect. But I mean, China, like many countries, including my own, are kind of grapple with this problem of how much to get military forces engaged in kind of these internal trouble spots. So that's another example of a kind of disconnect that may exist. And if you look at the kind of what do you call it, organization chart of how Chinese foreign policy is made, by the way, recently a new org chart was released, by the way, just in March in the Chinese media. It's worth studying, and you can see how some disconnects may continue. So we could talk more about that, but I think that gives you an idea. On the carrier issue, I would say that yes, we have takeoffs and landings, definitely, and that occurred, I think, in the late fall. And so actually now the Chinese media is very enthralled because it's been announced, I think just on Xinhua last week, that there would be which is pretty credible source, that there would be that Liaoning, which is the name of the carrier, would go on its first kind of long distance patrol. Now, will it have a full complement of aircraft? One may doubt, but we have to assume, China, I think, in many respects, vis-a-vis the carrier, has done its homework. I mean, in fact, I had Chinese naval officers as long as, almost 10 years ago tell me, Lyle, we could have had a carrier 10 years ago already. Those civilian leadership above us will not allow us to do what we want to do, because they're afraid of scaring our neighbors, and they think they want to devote resources to internal development, not to this. So, I think in some ways they're right that China could have been rather more rapid in its development if it wanted to. It's being slow, it's being deliberate, but we may consider there's so much more going on behind the scenes. We may consider that it, for example, has a complement of aircraft more quickly than we would have thought.
On the earthquake issue, I'm interested to see that Ma Xiaotian was on a plane within hours, I think, of the earthquake occurring. We'll go with Paddy Allen and then come to the front here.
Thank you very much, Professor. Commander Paddy Allen from the Ministry of Defence Strategy Unit. I was quite taken, you said you had 10 of those spiral diagrams and you only showed us 2, but I was quite taken with one of them where you said actions on PRC to clarify the U-shape, the 9-dotted line, consistent with UNCLOS, but nothing on the American side to ratify UNCLOS. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a very good point, and I think America's negotiating position would undoubtedly be strengthened with China if the United States were party. I share that. That's the view of the U.S. Navy, and I think our political system has some issues with commitments to treaties. So I take the point that we will continue to work from the inside to try to get that passed. The Chinese side, though, of course, it is quite problematic, and you can get a room full of Chinese analysts, real experts, including maritime legal experts, and they will disagree amongst each other about what that U-shaped line means. So the Chinese, I think, do have a lot of explaining to do. I do want to make one point, though, which I think it could be important here in the Chinese debate, which is that the People's Republic of China did not invent that line. It's inherited from the Republic of China that preceded it. Well, to me, that gives a bit of an out. That means, in some senses, they don't have to explain that line. They can, here's an area where China could alter its policy. Now, of course, it would be very difficult, but that is why, incredibly difficult, really, but that is why we have to talk about serious changes, I think, in the kind of Western or American approach in order to help China to get to that place. And that's why, for example, I advocate, and here my position is quite different than the official government position, but my view is that the United States should decrease the amount of surveillance missions. We will continue them. We have to continue them, just from a legal point of view. But that doesn't mean we can't significantly decrease those surveillance missions, because China has made it very clear to us that the surveillance missions make Chinese military leaders very anxious. Moreover, they've made it clear that along with Taiwan arms sales, that issue Those two issues are the two fundamental barriers to U.S.-China security cooperation. So, many of us kind of scratch our heads and say, why can't we work with the Chinese in international security? Well, we need to consider how to meet them halfway on these issues and begin to really start to walk forward. I can say, as somebody who's tried to work in upgrading U.S.-China defense ties, U.S.-China Navy ties, I've been in the trenches, writing the memos and so forth to upgrade this partnership. We have gotten almost nowhere in the last 5 years, and in fact, we're going backward. So we need to reverse that tendency with some hard decisions.
We'll go to the front here and then Ben Barry at the back.
It's Masato Kimura, Japanese journalist. My question is about U.S. grand design toward China in security and diplomacy. And Henry Kissinger and Lee Kuan Yew and Hugh White's idea are very similar. The key word is to both countries should coexist in the Pacific. But how is a big question. Your implication is a passive approach from the U.S. side. And in the picture of dogs. And so I can see the US, Obama's grand design, because Obama started with a G2 idea, and now suddenly he changed his mind to pivot in Asia. But already 55% of maritime power of the United States stay in the Pacific, and pivot means it will be more 5%. And I think so. Could you explain what could be the grand design of the U.S. Toward China?
Thank you very much for the excellent question. You've come to the kind of the $64 million question, as we say, and you see that. I concur with your assessment that is a general progress of U.S. policy, and I have major concerns, to be very frank. I think that there are numerous problems with the pivot or the rebalancing, and the general process that I see underway is consistent with White's analysis, is a escalation of rivalry. I think it's quite different. It's difficult to pinpoint which state has been, quote, more assertive. I think one can debate that. Certainly, when one goes to Beijing, you take one look at the papers or listen to the analysts there. They're convinced. As you can see from the evidence I've shown, there's lots of anxiety, lots of concern. They think they're being contained and so forth, and they're very concerned. They're talking about, as I shared with you, talking about major increases in their defense budget because they think that there is this, major alignment against them. So that's on the one hand, and then when you go to Washington, you hear really the antithesis of that, where China has to be deterred. And I believe U.S. policy where it has erred is that it is, while deterrence is crucial, and I don't want, I hope you don't consider me naive. If you look through my writings, you'll see that I believe military force is essential. In fact, I've advocated that our submarine force needs to be kept at appropriate levels, really increased. I'm quite concerned. I believe the number of U.S. submarines available, say, in 2020 is too low, and I've made that clear. So one needs to have the stick, but current U.S. policy, in my view, is speaking loudly and carrying a small stick. Of course, we need the opposite. We need to speak softly and carry a big stick. So, I view a number of problems. Now, you said how to kind of start. I believe the United States must take the initiative. I think China, as the weaker power for the foreseeable future, is in a kind of defensive crouch. As I've shown you, Chinese strategists are quite divided about where to go. China faces so many major internal problems. China, to be frank, is also quite inexperienced on the world stage. So, there are many reasons why the U.S. needs to begin this process. I'll give you one more, though. Let's remember, a century ago, there were not Chinese gunboats patrolling the Mississippi. Okay, to me, that is enough to assure us that which nation needs to move first. And, let's say, be the more mature country. But also the United States is considerably more powerful. It can afford to take some risks here in the interests of peace in the 21st century, and in the interest of arresting this rivalry. I will give you several reasons that more concerns I have with the pivot, but maybe we do that in the course of some other questions here, because I want to hear from you all too.
And Barry?
I'm the land warfare expert here at the Institute. You've answered the question I was going to ask, so can I put a different one? Are there not wider opportunities for military-to-military cooperation, both with the US and with other countries, with regard to counter-piracy further afield, particularly in the Indian Ocean, where there's been a Chinese naval task force, and also with regard to China's modestly but continually increasing footprint in UN peacekeeping operations? I mean, for example, as we speak right now, the British regiment in the UN force in Cyprus is actually answering to a Chinese commanding general.
I did not know that. Thank you. That is very, very interesting, and a variety of good points you just made. We're completely on the same page. China, we have to consider. I just gave another lecture on Chinese military modernization, and it's really quite remarkable how interested China is in non-traditional security. That issue has taken off in China. Actually, this latest Red Book I published, one reason I'm quite proud of this is this has 6 Chinese scholars and 6 American scholars all discussing non-traditional security. And there's a bit of a gap between how American strategists conceive of that and how Chinese strategists conceive of it. And that's a normal part of discourse on international affairs. But you're absolutely right that China's improving capabilities, increasing prowess. After all, one reason China was so reluctant in past years, if we think a decade ago, for example, China was rather backward in many respects on the military side, and they were embarrassed, naturally. And that's no longer, I would say, the case, really. And I think the fact that we see China quite involved in many UN operations in Africa and elsewhere is very, very encouraging. I mean, that to me, that is exactly the kind of China that we want to see astride the global stage. So I'm really encouraged that, by the way, China, if I'm not mistaken, has the most advanced training center for training blue helmets, and any of you who have been involved in UN peacekeeping operations know that training is not a small issue for peacekeeping operations. So that itself, that training center, I think there are 2 now, is a huge contribution to moving that forward. So I am very encouraged by that. I'm also encouraged that this, if we can think of naval peacekeeping at sea, in effect the counter-piracy operation, I agree that could move to other areas. I'm actually, in the course of one of my spirals, I'm advocating that China consider sending a squadron also to Gulf of Hormuz. Now, on the face of it, we might say, my goodness, the Chinese are extending their influence into the Persian Gulf. Well, look at how much Chinese oil is going through that strait, and you'll see it's really a very natural development. But what role could a Chinese task force, hopefully operating together with other, Royal Navy task force or a French Navy task force in the Gulf area, not to mention the U.S. Navy, this could play a very positive role, both a signal to Tehran that, as it were, they're not allies, but they are partners, that a partner is in the area. I think that could be a positive signal to Tehran. But also it would show this Chinese very strong commitment to freedom of navigation. After all, many people have concerns about Chinese views on freedom of navigation, and yet China clearly benefits hugely from freedom of navigation. It's beyond question. So this would be a very potent symbol of that, as are their operations in counter-piracy area. But there are many, many areas, whether counterterrorism. We can think of so many where China can play a positive role. So this requires a lot of rethinking in Beijing, because I think China has been very cautious, but they are beginning to think anew about possibilities. I'll give you one example quickly. Look at I hope some research work is being done. I'm not doing it on China's this sending of paramilitary forces into the Golden Triangle area at the corner of Laos, Burma, Myanmar. I mean, that's a very interesting deployment of Chinese, we want to call it almost soft power, really, that don't really intend to use force, and yet they are bringing, I think, some more governance to a region very badly needed, that needs this kind of governance. So to me, that may be a good case study looking forward of where Chinese foreign policy is going. There are many interesting opportunities, and actually I would encourage folks here in Britain to really push the boundaries. I'm afraid in Washington now they are very much set on this path of rivalry, and that in a zero-sum game, it's difficult to generate those kind of that kind of creativity that's needed for that sort of diplomacy.
We'll start to group the questions a little because we're running out of time. We have two here, but we'll take at the same time, please.
Thank you very much. Yasuo Naito from Japanese Sankei News. My question is regarding of the U.S.-Japan alliance. Well, it seems that there is discussion going on between UK and Japanese security officials and officials to reestablish UK-Japan alliance. Well, it's because that the U.S. power is now declining a little bit in the Pacific region, so that's why those specialists are thinking about this kind of reviving of the alliance with UK. I mean the UK-Japan alliance. What do you think about this kind of idea? Is it helps to U.S.-Japan alliance, or it's contradict to this kind of alliance? Thank you.
And could you just pass the mic over, and we'll have a second question as well.
Yes, Peter Marino, London School of Economics and Quaternion Media. I'd like to posit a few ideas in conjunction with each other and ask for your reaction to them. Given that, I think it's safe to say the fundamental objective of the CCP is regime survival, and that also the PLA has not engaged in any significant combined arms actual operations with its modernized forces, and that I think Clausewitz's dictum that no plan survives, no strategy survives first engagement with the enemy, and that PLA performance in any medium or large scale operations is far from assured, that either perhaps we can think that they might blink at such an opportunity, given that nothing could be perhaps more damaging to CCP regime survival than military defeat, or that if they don't blink, the outcome of it could be significantly different than the modernization and accumulation of equipment might at first indicate.
Well, thanks very much for the good questions, challenging questions. I think you're right that, I mean, my view generally is, let me see if I can, here, okay. So I thought there might be a good Japan question, and here you see, maybe I'll just go back to the podium briefly so I can see the slide. You see some of my ideas on U.S.-Japan, China-Japan relations, and here I would just highlight that, I mean, by the way, Marines are already leaving Okinawa, and I think that will make many people on Okinawa very happy, so I think that's good, and I would like to see more of that. And so, in effect, it's easy to start with something you're already doing, right? But more can be done. I do believe China made a major mistake with the rare earths escapade, if we can call it that, and something has to be done to kind of reassure Japan that that will not be the future. But I'm very concerned that history, that many people are trying to put history aside in this question. I believe that's fundamentally wrong-headed. We need to talk about history. By the way, not just China and Japan. The United States also needs to talk about history. We need to develop a kind of culture, I think, among analysts here where history is something that is discussed very widely, openly, and look at the European example. I can say this as a Jewish person who lived in Germany. There's a lot to be learned from the way that situation was dealt with to bring Germany in as a full player in Europe. And I'm just saying, that has to be part of this process. I'm wholly convinced that the tensions in the East China Sea are not about little rocks with goats on them. They're not even about fish or oil and gas, although that is a small part of it. they're mostly about history, certainly from the Chinese side, and that we just have to talk about these issues and get to a better place. As long as we try to sweep them off the table and say, well, that's a different discussion, we will not make any progress. I'm quite convinced of that. I do believe there has to be some restructuring of the U.S.-Japan alliance. And at this point, I think it is clear to me that China perceives the alliance as very much directed at Japan. So we need to think about reshaping it. That may involve an increase in Japan's defense outlays. I think that's probably kind of inevitable, just so that Japan also obviously needs to feel comfortable in a new framework. But I think there are ways to change the U.S.-Japan alliance, first of all, so that it's more comfortable for Japanese. I mean, you don't have to know much about Okinawa to see that that is not a stable situation at all. So we can do, for example, more with air and naval power and move a lot of the Marines troops out. That alone would, put the ship, put them on, make it a more afloat presence. We can do that. So there are ways to think creatively about this alliance, which would have powerful impact in for helping this relationship. As you may guess, though, I do not see what can Britain do. I think Britain can be the mature and creative player here, facilitating a new and creative diplomacy, across the board here. And really, I mean, Britain, in some ways taught the world how to do sophisticated diplomacy. So after all, let's have that kind of those same kind of norms, in East Asia that can help us through this current crisis. That's where I would like to see Britain play a role. Of course, I don't think it would be necessarily a bad thing for the Royal Navy to regularly visit the Asia Pacific in future times, and I think that probably will happen. But I think Britain also has to be, given the history, also has to be kind of cautious about its enlarging its presence. It needs to make sure that it's a balanced approach. And I fear that much American policy these days has been quite imbalanced, much more focused on deterrence, and unfortunately not focused enough on engagement, particularly with Beijing. All right, the second question now. I would just, I'll make just a couple of points here. I mean, I don't quite agree with your assessment for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, it's often said that there's no combined arms activities. I don't really think that's true. I think, from what I see, sure, they have inter-service rivalries and they have, some kind of backbiting and this and that. But I mean, I'll see things, for example, you have Air Force writers and Air Force institutions talking about mine warfare in a serious way. You don't much see that in many militaries. That kind of conveys a sense of joint approach to warfighting. So, I have to say that there's a kind of inertial view of the Chinese military that, has thought for a long time that these people are quite incompetent and that they're so focused on ideology. As you said, all they care about is regime security and not much else matters. I disagree. I think these people are very competent. In my interactions with them, I'm very impressed. As I discuss, I've done a lot of work on mine warfare and submarine operations. We're quite impressed. Exercise patterns, for example, I think shows a growing sophistication, including doing exercises that the U.S. Navy doesn't really do for a variety of reasons. So I think we need, you can look in other areas, flying a number of hours, flying for pilots and so forth. This is not the PLA we knew 10 years ago. It is much improved. I think we need to, military planners do not have the luxury of saying, well, they're probably not competent. We can't do that. And really here we should not do that. We'd be making a very grave mistake in any of these relevant capitals if we take the view that the Chinese military is weak. We need these weapons are very potent. I mean, let's just say Hezbollah operating a Chinese designed missile almost sank a corvette a few years back. This gives us an example of how with these new weapon systems, deployed can be very, very difficult. I'll just give one more example there. On that note, I did some research, in fact, published it in Survival on China's lessons from the Falklands War. If we think about the Falklands War, the Royal Navy, I believe, lost 7 ships, if I'm not mistaken. The Chinese analysis is that, if, and this, is quite conventional, that if the fuses had worked properly in the Argentine bombs, or if the Argentines had actually more than, I think, was it 6 or 7 exocets? What if they had 600 or 700 exocets, or 6,000 or 7,000? Things would have been very different. And indeed, as U.S. and other navies contemplate the possibility of conflict in the East Asian littoral here, we had better understand that this is a very different. The nature of this conflict would be very different. I think the losses would be many times that were suffered in the Falklands. Many times, maybe on the order of magnitude of 5 or 10 times that. So we're talking about massive air and naval combat with major losses on all sides.
We have, unfortunately...
Sorry, if I can... so last point I'll make is that I'm encouraging all sides, Washington and Beijing, Tokyo as well, and the others, to be very cautious. I mean, when Hugh White says, makes a very important conclusion that, in order to avoid the darkest scenarios, we have to think very clearly about what would happen in those dark scenarios. So I would invite you to do the same, and suggest you might come to similar conclusions about the necessity for cautious and creative diplomacy.
That's a cheery note to end on. We have unfortunately run out of time, but I think you would agree that we've had a fascinating discussion here with Professor Goldstein, and I'd like you to join me in thanking him for his time.